So I want to look at recording, or not necessarily recording, but receiving audio as an input. We looked at playing audio last time, so how do we do the opposite? How do we get audio in? And so last time we used a DAC, which is a digital audio or digital analog converter. We're going to do the opposite this time. We're going to use an ADC. We're going to do an analog to digital converter. So I'm going to make a new object, and I'm going to go straight to using the easy ADC tilde, which makes a microphone icon.
Question.
Yeah.
Mine automatically came up as a speaker. How do I make it so that?
Yeah, so go to new object again, type in easy, and make sure it's ADC and not DAC.
Okay.
Yeah. The ADC and the DAC are connected in that when one is on, the other is on. So if you have a speaker and a microphone, they're either both on or both off. And now is where I can very quickly just use the meter tilde object, METEER, and that will give me an audio meter. If I lock the patch and click to turn this on, you'll get a visual representation of the volume level that the mic hears, right? So you can see it corresponding to my voice. That's great. It gives you a little, you can tell if it's going to clip, right? And it has a little red bar for that. But we can't do much with that besides look at it. So what else can we do? Well, we can connect a float to the bottom of the meter, and now it's going to give us a numerical value based on the amplitude or volume that the microphone is seeing. And so like, okay, so numbers we can do things with, right? We can write programs with numbers. And so I might connect a few other objects to this. One object I can use is a peak object. And the peak is going to tell me if the value it's getting is greater than the last value, and it's going to just output the highest number it's seen. Unfortunately, though, peak only works with integers. And looking at my volume here, it's quite small. So I want to scale it up. And so just looking at these values, it looks like I'm getting to like 1/10 of a value there. So I'm just going to do times 10 dot between there and my peak. Asterisk. Asterisk times a number is multiply. And so now, so like 5 is the loudest it's gotten to. And I'm using the asterisk 10 with a dot, so I'm actually multiplying that volume value by a decimal number, 10.0 really. I could have typed it would be the same as 10 dot. In fact, it removes the 0 if I try to put it 10.0. And that's because I want to preserve the float value throughout the multiplication, right? If I try to multiply a float by an integer, it rounds the float first. And so if my float is below 0, it's going to round it to 0. Mm-hmm. And 0 times 10 is always going to be 0. I'm never going to get that peak. So I'm keeping floats multiplied by floats. And then when it gets to the peak, if it's above the last one, it'll output it, right? So if I do a clap, I can get a higher number. And it's going to get increasingly difficult for me to be louder than the last thing. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So I'm getting somewhere. I might be able to do something with that. Another thing that's a bit more useful, I can do a peak amp with a tilde. And this is going to give me the maximum amplitude of a signal over time. So I have to give it a time period that I want it to sample at. So I might say 100 milliseconds. I probably don't want it to sample at anything higher than that. I could go as low as like 30. But 100 milliseconds is a tenth of a second. I'm going to start to notice weird delays if I do a sample size greater than that. And this, the peak amp, it's detecting the signal, so it's got to connect to the easy ADC directly, because it's analyzing the signal, whereas the meter is converting the signal into a number in this other one for the peak. Peak amp deals with the signal directly, and we can connect a float to that to see what it's doing. It should be fairly similar to the float that I'm getting out of the meter in actuality. The difference is that the meter has a built-in sample size. We can set the sample size with the peak amp. So what else could so instead of a peak, I might want to do something like, I might want to set a threshold, right? So if the volume is above a certain threshold, I can do something. How would I set a threshold, like in math? How do you test if something's greater than something else? Yeah, so we can use a greater than object. And we might say, looking again at these values, if it's greater than 0.2, I want to know about it. I can connect that to my number, and I'm going to put a toggle onto here. And I've got nothing, and if I clap, or if I talk really loudly for a long time, you'll see the toggle stays on, and then it goes off. That's kind of interesting. And to be really clear about what this is outputting, I'm going to do two other things. So if I connect it to a message, right, I can see I'm getting a 0 or a 1 out of this object. The tricky or the problematic thing that you might run into with a greater than is, like, let's say I wanted this to play a track, right, like from my, let me do this real fast. Triangle. Use the ADC. Cool. So if I have this 1 going into here, it should play the triangle. Shoot. So the problem.
What is it doing?
Yeah, why is it doing that, right? Let's connect a bang to the greater than.
You have to put a number bigger than.
It's constantly, the greater than operation is constantly telling you true or false, basically. Is the number that you just gave me from here greater than or less than this? True or false, true or false, true or false. So it's constantly producing output, right? So it's not detecting a change from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0. It's just telling you this is the answer, this is the answer. So it's constantly emitting data. So it's like feeding your player a series of 100 ones, right? And so you get that.
I'll put it in a selector if.
Yeah. So let's look at the some best ways to do that, right? There's another object I could use called past. So I'm going to say past 0.2 instead of greater than 0.2. And if we connect a message up to this one, we will see that it gives us a bang. And if I connect my button to it, we'll see that it only gives us one bang when the volume passes 0.2. And then when it goes below 0.2, it resets. And then when it passes 0.2, you get one bang. You don't get a string of epic bangs. You just get the one when it happens, and then after it resets. So this is something where we might then do this, just to get the 1 or 2 triangles when we want them. You're seeing another problem with using audio as an output and an input at the same time. So the very beginning of the triangle, and you can see it in the waveform, is quite loud. And so it's self-triggering. So I might want to adjust either the volume that the triangle track is playing or the threshold that I'm looking for. The other object that I'll, sorry, no more triangle, thank you. So the other object that we could use if we wanted to use the greater than, and this is one of my favorite objects, it's called change. And it filters out repetition of numbers. So I could run my toggle into the change object, and it's going to give me then the number only when it changes. It's kind of weird to do this with a toggle because the toggle is only going to be 0 or 1 anyway. But we can see, for instance, that this bang on the output of the change changes much less than this one on the greater than, less than. It also has some interesting other outlets, right? So it will let me know when it changes from 0 to non-zero. So in this case, when it goes from 0 to 1, it's going to give me a bang on that outlet. And when it goes from 1 to 0, it'll give me a bang on this outlet, or from non-zero to 0, really. Yeah. So I can use both of those things. I think it's actually going to give me a 1. Is it going to give me a 1? Hello? Yeah. So I could use that to directly drive my triangle.
I'm sorry, what does change do exactly?
It lets you know when the input coming into it has changed. Let me give you another example. If I delete that, let me put up just a number box connected to the change. Okay, and I'm going to type in the number 1, and there was a change. And number 2, there's a change. 3, change. 4, change. 5, change. 5 again, no change. 5 again, no change. 5 again, no change. 3, change.
Okay.
0, if I had it still connected. 0 is a special state, right? So, and anything that's not 0. So going back to 1, I'm going to get this transition to happen. And then if I go back down to 0, I'm going to get the other transition to happen. So it's particularly good at looking for things that go from 0 to non-zero, but works for other numbers as well. And this is, again, a way you can filter out, if you're getting a stream of data from a sensor or something like that, you can filter out repetition that can slow your program down. Questions about using the mic as a way to get information about volume? So then using something like the change or the past, I hope you can make this conceptual leap. But if I put a toggle on either of these things, right, I have now made a clapper. Looking at this one. Where I can turn something on and off by clapping. So we're going to come back to that in a second. The other thing I want to show you was how to play videos. Playing videos is actually quite similar to playing audio files, so you have a bit of familiarity with this. Except instead of using the tilde on our objects, we use a JIT prefix instead of a tilde suffix. So I'm going to say JIT, which stands for jitter, which is just a convention that Max uses to talk about video files. Dot QT, which stands for QuickTime. Dot movie. And this is going to be our basic video driver for our patch. I can throw a few other things on here to get it going. Instead of start and stop that SF play uses, or in play, pause, resume, open, jit.qt.movie uses read to open a file, and then start and stop to begin and end playback of that file. And we can preview our movie in the patcher with a jit.p window, which will give us this black box.
Wait, how did you get that?
Jit.p window for preview window. Jit.p window. And so then if I lock my patch and click the read button, I can find a video file. Where's my video file? Use this one. Open that. Hit start. And something strange happens. I can hear the audio from that video, but I can't see it. So the other thing I have to do with jit.qt.movie is it needs bangs to display frames. So I'm going to use a Q metro, not a regular metro, a Q metro. And now, if I turn the Q metro on and hit start, the video plays. What's the difference between a Q metro and a regular metro? It has to do with how... Yeah, it has to do with how the object deals with overflow. And I have to give the Q metro a number. Sorry, I should have done that. So I give it 30. That means every 30 milliseconds it's going to output a bang. Our metro object, right? If we had metro 100, that means every 10th of a second it's going to output a bang. If you start doing a lot with your computer, right? If you're doing a lot of live video processing, you're playing a lot of audio files, things that are very CPU intensive, the computer is going to slow down, and it might not hit exactly the metro every 100 milliseconds. So the computer can do two things, right? It can either stretch the time to catch up. So maybe the metro hits at 101 milliseconds or 102 milliseconds. Or it can skip that beat and continue to the next one, right? So does it prefer hitting every metro or hitting every beat? The Q metro prefers hitting every beat. And if it misses one, it's going to forget it and stay on beat. Whereas a metro object is going to make sure that every beat is played, even if it's played at a delay.
Question.
Yeah.
When I try typing JIT-P, it turns orange. So like.
JIT.P window, all one word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Why does this matter? This weirdness about the metro objects. When we're working with video, the frame rate is important, right? We want the frame rate to be consistent, and it's better to drop a frame than to stretch a frame in time. So we use the Q metro with it. Okay, so this is kind of obnoxiously small, this P window. In my JIT.movie, having just read the file, I'm not being very specific with my objects here. So, for instance, with my movie, I probably want to give it a resolution. So I'm going to say 320 by 240, so I can type in the resolution for the video. And then I'd like my P window to be the same size. So I'm going to go over here on the right, and there's an inspector button. It looks like a little info eye. And that is going to tell me information about whatever object I have selected. If I don't have anything selected, it's going to be blank. So and it's going to be different for every object, because every object is slightly different. So for my P window, for instance, it's going to tell me what its patching rectangle is, and it's the X coordinate and the Y coordinate, and then the size. And I can double click into these things and change them. So I'm going to say I want it to be 320 by 240 in size. And I hit enter, and now I've got a nice big P window. Other properties you might see here, you can change things about like the color of some of the objects, like my toggles have several different colors. I can change those colors. Again, I can change the size. I can make it be included in the background, included in presentation mode. We haven't gotten to that yet. I could hide it when I lock the patch. That's kind of a weird one, but if I lock the patch, it gets hidden.
So how do you get a specific video in the window? Like, do you click and drag it like you do audio files?
No, yeah. So let me go over that again. So I click read, that read button, and then I navigate to my video file, right? And you're like, that's super irritating. I would agree with you that it is. So other things I can do, if I know the name of that video file and it's in the same place as my patcher, do I have any videos on the desktop? I do. We got that drumming video. We're going to see if it likes MPEGs. It might not. Yeah. I found the Qt movie object. It works with MOV files and MP4 files the best.
So basically the files that everyone just uses automatically.
Yeah. This seems to be glitching though. I'm going to save it and reopen it. Okay. Let's not actually play that. So what else, what other ways do I have to get video files in here, right? So I can use the read button, but over time this will quickly become really irritating. So that file that I put in there was called hashtag vid1.mov. So I could also just add that directly to my message, the file name. I have to make sure that the spelling is exactly matching it or it won't work, but that will load the file in, right? And so this is where I might then say, okay, I want a load bang to go into that message so that right when the patch loads, it puts that file into my movie player. The other thing I can do is I could add that file as an attribute directly to my jit.qt.movie. So I could say after my size, I say at for attribute, hashtag vid1.mov. And as long as your video files are in the same place as your patch, the same folder, these methods should work. So I'm going to see if that works. I'm going to save this, close it, open it up again, turn on my Metro, hit start. Doesn't do it. We had this issue with SF Play too. So I guess using the read message is better, and I will have to look into why that is later. Let me try it again with the load bang. Yeah. All right. So let me take out the attribute name. Some other things I can do with a movie file. I can send it a rate message. So I could say like rate 0.5. And that is going to change the playback rate. So it's going to play it back at half speed. It's going to go very slowly. I can also send it a frame message with a number. And that will make it jump to that frame. I can see you all becoming video DJs in the near future. Now, something else I can do with messages is instead of giving them like a baked-in value, I can use a special sequence called $1. And that is referring to the first inlet. So it's going to replace that $1 value with whatever the first inlet receives. So I might hook up a float to my rate so that I can change it. So I can make it really fast, ponderously slow, kind of slow, 2 speed, and 1 is just regular speed. So 1 is normal. And I can do the same thing with the frame, except I'm going to use an integer number box. There, and I can, this lets me like scrub kind of through the video. frame by frame.
Is there an output, like at one, for the video, like if a video reaches that frame, then like we can patch it back and read that it's at that frame?
Yeah, yeah. So Qt Movie has a dump out, and I'm going to look at the help file because off the top of my head, I don't know how to do that, but I know that's in here. And if I go to the frame tab of our Qt Movie help file, it's going to give us, how do we get frame count? Oh wait, I guess I have to read the video first. Get frame count. It's got 181 frames. Dump all frames. Dump range of frames. Oh. Is there a current frame? Yeah, frame report. Right. Here we go. That'll give me the time. And then we could multiply that by the frame rate to get the current frame. Or divide it by the frame rate, excuse me. So you'll see other things here, right? Like we can loop the video. So like I was trying to do with the file name, I could say at loop 1 will make the video loop when it gets to the end. And the other thing that you might find useful for your project, I can also say at vol 0. So you notice like the volume is kind of baked in to the JIT.movie player, right? It's not a separate thing that I connect to the EasyDAC. So if I want to control that volume, I can do so with the volume attribute. And I can type that directly in to the player itself.
Okay, so how the volume is going to be controlled? It's going to go down like a fade or something?
No, so so if I put it in as an attribute, it's cooked in. So like volume 0 means no volume. Volume 0.5 is half whatever the file volume is. I can also, though, any of these things that I'm using the @ symbol for, I could do like these rate messages, right, as a message. So I could do something like message vol $1, put that with a float, put that into here, reread my thing, start, jump ahead to frame 2000.
Right side. The audio
So I'm
memory
talking,
will play on a
and
built-in
now if I
speaker.
put it at
If
0.5,
the stone does not have an audio memory,
it's quieter,
it will ask
0.1,
you to record a new one.
it's very quiet, 0, the volume's off. 1,
You can listen to other
It's back
people's
on.
stories and even record your own with If These Walls Could Speak.
So you may be able to tell what's coming next. But, so what are some things I could do?
I created a float object and I'm trying to type 1, but it won't let me like.
Because your patch isn't locked. Yeah. So, let's see here. What can we do? We can do with our past 4, right? What if we connect that button to our start? isn't it doing anything? My easy ADC got messed up. So the video starts when I clap. That's cool. I'd like it to stop playing when I clap too. So I want to use a toggle. I'm going to make a new select object with 0 and 1. So when it's 0, it'll stop. When it's 1, it'll start. That's going to be connected to this toggle over here. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. It's very creepy working with video footage of yourself. I don't recommend it.
You're not used to how you look.
Right, so that's one thing I can do. So I can use my past object to create some kind of like start-stop video playback. But that's kind of rudimentary. I could do something perhaps more interesting. What if I route the peak amp, right, that I'm sampling every 100 milliseconds? What if I pipe that directly into the rate? So that now for the video to play, I have to keep talking at a rather loud volume level, right? Or maybe that's too low, so I might mess with it. Maybe I do a times 2 dot. Oops. So it's going to at least multiply that by 2. It's probably still too low. Do times 5. And make sure the video is actually playing. And so now we'll see it kind of jitter through time in a strange way. Right, so that's weird. I could also do the same thing with frame, right? So I might figure out how many frames using that frame count attribute are in here, multiply this by something like 4,000 as a float, and put that into the frame. And so now it's going to jump through the different frames in correlation to the volume, right? And so, I mean, you have to think about this as a creative endeavor, right? I would not do this if I was trying to play a normal video to normal people who want to watch Tron, right? It's not going to work. It's going to be a horrible experience. But just looking at this, like, that's kind of interesting, right? It's almost like I'm a Muppet or something.
Make a video of yourself doing like weird faces and then have like random sequence type thing.
Yes, okay, so that's getting into an interesting thing, right? With the frame, we're going to a very specific frame in the video. And if it's not playing, right, it's just going to go to that frame and stop there. So you could make a movie out of a series of images that are completely different, right? They would just look like if you played it as a video.
Mm-hmm.
But if you work with it as a series of frames, you could turn this into some kind of like photo viewer, right? So I might say, okay, so past 0.1, show this photo. Past 0.2, show a different photo. Past 0.3, show a different photo, right? So I can kind of chain together an if-else statement in that way. All right, what else do I have for you? There is an, oh yeah, so there's a few more There's another attribute I might put on here, at auto start 1. You can probably guess that would mean that as soon as it gets a file, it's going to start playing the file, right? Or you might not want that behavior. You might want it to not start playing as soon as it reads that file. So you use auto start 0. You might also, this is kind of helpful for previewing the video, right? But you might want it to be full screen. How do you do that? We're going to use a Visi object. So over here on the left, there's a V. These are abstractions or smaller bits of code that are kind of packaged up in a nice way for you. I'm going to go to Output and Projector, and I'm going to click and drag that into my patch. And it makes this object in the patch and then this extra window. I can't close the extra window, so I'm going to move it out of the way. And I can connect this directly to the output of my jit.qt movie, and you'll see that I get on this other screen whatever I had in that P window. And so to use this, it's very straightforward. I just click the full screen button to make that secondary window full screen, and I hit escape to make it go away. That's a very helpful little snippet. You may find, should you go exploring down the rabbit hole of what else is in this Visi folder, an epic array of video filters, which you go down this rabbit hole at your own risk. But it can be fun to play with these things.
I just read Two-Toner as Stoner.
Okay. A few other things that may be helpful, right? So at some point, this is going to get to be chaotic and too much, right? So I've got like all of this stuff. I've got the peak amp, its number, the past. Let me remove some of the stuff I'm not using. I'm not using any of this. I'm just using these things. And of these things, all I really care about here is this toggle, right? If I wanted to go back to my select for starting and stopping the video. So I can hide all of this stuff or condense it into one object. So if I take all of these things, select all of them by clicking and dragging around them, and go to Edit, Encapsulate, it'll replace all of them with this little object that just says P. Excuse you.
Hello, I'm Matthew Mosier, an assistant professor of digital media.
And I am going to put in, I'm going to double click this so I can change the name of it, and I'm going to call it peak volume. You can call it whatever you want. It just lets me know what's inside of there, right? And so now I've got that little object. If I ever want to go back into there again and see what's in there, if I lock my patch and double click it, it opens it as a subpatch. And it's replaced the very beginning and very end of that patch with an inlet and an outlet. I can have many inlets. I can have many outlets, right? I can hold down Option, click and drag this. It'll make a second inlet, which you see appeared right there. I can do the same thing with the outlet, and a second outlet appeared right there. I could connect other things to those outlets and inlets and have them control other variables or aspects of a patch. That saves with my main patch. I don't have to save that as something separate. There are ways where if I make one kind of snippet of patch, that I'm using over and over and over again in multiple places where I can save that as its own object, as an abstraction, and include it in other patches, but I'm not going to get into that just yet. But, for instance, so this peak volume thing, if I wanted lots of these, I can just option click and drag and make many of these things. They are each unique objects though, so if I change one of them, like if I remove that extra inlet and outlet in that one, even though they all have the same name, you'll see this one no longer has that, and these ones do. So it's not like instances of the same thing. The other thing that you should know about is comments. So if with my patch unlocked, if I hit C, it gives me a text box where I can just type anything in. And all it is text. It doesn't have an output of any kind. It's just text. So I can use this to let myself know, or someone else who's using my code, how it works. Like I might say click toggle to turn on and put that over by this toggle. I might make another comment that says open a different video and put that over by my read object or my read message. So comments, you should always be putting comments in your stuff for two reasons. One, when I open it up, I'll be able to have an idea of what you're trying to do, right? Which is good. The other reason is you're going to make something cool, right? It's going to be really cool. It's going to work really well. And then you're going to close it, and it's going to sit on your computer for 6 months. And then in 6 months, you're going to get an invitation to show your piece at UCF Celebrates the Arts or at a gallery or downtown or something. You'll be like, cool, I have the perfect thing for that. You open it up and you look at it and you're like, what is this mess? Right? I have no idea what this is. So that's like comments will save you in those situations. Very helpful.